Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to wisdom, warrior Manjushri. Homage to lineage masters. The Dharma, profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in a million eons. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Today we begin teaching and discussing the third important topic within the common preliminary practices of Buddhist spiritual training and development. Teaching about the faults and sufferings of samsara. This particular spiritual practice and meditation method is also extremely important and significant in our Buddhist training. I hope that during the process of receiving these teachings, all Dharma friends will listen with great care and attention. The upcoming guidance, preparatory study, and practice should all be approached with diligent effort and dedication. The preliminary practices on the surface may appear simple, like teachings on precious human life, the impermanence of life, the faults of samsara, and so on. These practices appear simple, but in reality, when it comes to actual practice, they may be even more difficult than some other forms of practice. For example, practices like working with winds, channels and drops, or visualizing drops, visualizing the deity, or reciting mantras. These are not that difficult. The mind is relatively easy to focus in these practices, but the practices here are both broad in scope and truly deeply profound. As a result, many ordinary people, at the very beginning, find it hard to get started and cannot settle their minds. They are unable to reach a certain state or find the right feeling. This is why, when it comes to these major practices, indeed, the seeds planted through practicing virtuous Dharma are relatively weak, and this is the reason. Therefore, on the path of spiritual cultivation, one must never give up halfway or stop in the middle, because if this particular practice is not successfully completed, except for a very few individuals with exceptional faculties, I feel that ordinary people would find it very difficult to successfully practice other Dharma methods. So this time, I have also deliberately arranged a relatively long period of time to explain these teachings to everyone in detail. Perhaps during the process of listening and contemplating, everyone feels that this period is too long, or you might wonder whether it is really necessary to spend so much time studying. You may have such feelings. I have also considered this repeatedly. However, if everyone spends a longer time honing themselves in the common preliminary practices, then it will be much easier to practice the uncommon preliminaries. And when practicing the uncommon preliminaries over a relatively long period as well, if everyone puts in a certain amount of effort to study and practice, then in the future there will be no difficulty in practicing any Dharma. Even if you never practice other teachings, you will not have any regrets. On this point, I think that some Dharma friends here who have just entered the Buddhist path may not be able to feel it right now. But if you practice throughout your life, when you reach old age, you might finally realize, oh, back then, because my common and uncommon preliminary practices were quite solid, that's why now I have become a very good practitioner. If at the very beginning I had tried to climb the highest peak, it's very likely that I wouldn't be where I am now. I would have such thoughts. So this time, I am also giving everyone a more detailed explanation. Now here it is explained like this. Understanding that all matters in samsara are meaningless, only benefiting sentient beings with great compassion, not being attached to existence or peace, practicing according to the Mahayana teachings. At the feet of the incomparable Guru, I pay homage. This is what the author places at the beginning of each guiding text. A verse of praise and prayer to the Guru, meaning that the teacher of Patrul Rinpoche, the Venerable Master Jigme Gyalwe Nyugu, had thoroughly understood and realized all the various trivial matters and mundane affairs of worldly samsara. Things like subduing enemies, protecting friends and family, making money, and working in the world, and even being attached to practices for future lives, such as engaging in meditation or chanting the Buddha's name with sincere devotion and focused intention. All worldly matters, in fact, when considered carefully, have little real significance or lasting value in the grand scheme of existence. Because we seek to be free from samsara, all these worldly trivialities are meaningless. Moreover, his guru acted solely with the great compassion of the Mahayana tradition to benefit countless, boundless, sentient beings. This can also be seen from the biography of Jigme Gyalwe Nyugu. From childhood until his parinirvana, his only activity was to benefit sentient beings. He always placed the great task of benefiting sentient beings as his top priority. He did not care about any personal sacrifices or efforts. This is what it means to benefit sentient beings. He himself, with profound and insightful wisdom, was not attached to the various worldly extremes, and with deep and genuine compassion was not attached to the extreme of nirvana. Thus, he abided in neither extreme. Just as explained and taught in Mahayana Buddhism, he faithfully practiced the 6 perfections and all virtuous deeds, upholding the true Dharma. Such an incomparable master in the 3 realms at his feet, I prostrate myself with deep respect and pray for blessings. May I, as swiftly as possible, give rise to a deep sense of renunciation from the cycle of samsara within my own mind stream, and attain liberation beyond birth and death. In the past, disciples of Khenpo Ngakchung, such as Rinpoche Shyaju and others, as well as many lineage masters, when instructing on the faults of samsara, always required that this verse be recited daily first. Then, in front of all the lineage masters, with your own root guru as the principal focus, pray sincerely and wholeheartedly, closing your eyes and joining your palms in prayer. In this practice, I must receive the blessings of all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and my Guru. May I truly give rise as soon as possible within my own mind stream, a firm conviction that there is no real meaning in any aspect of samsara, and see through worldly matters, giving rise to a genuine and uncontrived renunciation. After praying with such devotion, begin your own meditation practice. Therefore, when we practice the common preliminaries, there is a verse before the contemplation on the impermanence of life, and here there is also a verse. For each verse, when you are practicing each guided meditation, you can use it as a prayer at the beginning, then focus your mind single-pointedly on the practice. In this way, in our own mental continuum, the blessing of the Guru is truly important. This is how I see it. The blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are very important to us. If we do not pray and supplicate with a very sincere and earnest heart, then the wisdom within their continuum cannot be awakened within us. Although all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, without bias and with equality, regard all sentient beings with great compassion, but this also requires the karmic connection and faith of those who are receptive. If this condition of faith does not arise, then even the boundless blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas cannot, without cause, merge into our hearts. Therefore, in our daily lives, when we pray to the Guru and to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, we must definitely employ this kind of method in our own practice. Because nowadays, many writers or people who focus mainly on theory in the world, they only talk about theory and never address the aspect of faith. This is a shortcoming on their part. Therefore, we should combine theory and practice in our cultivation. Especially for practitioners, it is essential to integrate the blessings of the lineage masters into one's own heart. This is extremely important. Once the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas enter the heart, the mind becomes more capable. It will not give rise to this or that wrong view. Moreover, whatever practice you engage in will yield immediate results when you have such blessings. These are the previous verses praising the Guru. Now the third topic, the faults of samsara, which are divided into 2 aspects. First, contemplating the general suffering of samsara. Second, contemplating the specific sufferings of each of the 6 realms. Let's begin with the first point, as mentioned earlier. Although we have already obtained the rare and precious human body with leisure and opportunity, but it cannot remain for long. Ultimately, it will inevitably come to an end in death. This summarizes the content of the previous 2 sections. We have already obtained what was described in the first guidance text, namely, the rare and precious human body with leisure and opportunity. After obtaining this human body, we can feel it ourselves. This human body is not easily attained, so we must practice diligently and earnestly. Many people may, at certain times, have such intentions or desires. The second guidance text tells us, if this precious human body were eternal and could exist for a long time, then it would be fine to wait a while before practicing, and we would still have time. But that's not the case. Our human body is like a bubble or a mirage in water, illusory and unreal, fleeting and ever-changing in an instant. Therefore, it must be put to use. Before it is destroyed, we must rely on this human body to practice. Therefore, just as Master Tsongkhapa said, the precious human life and the impermanence of life help us cut off attachment to this present life. We must renounce samsara, both the samsara of this life and that of future lives. Many people cannot let go of the samsara of this life and remain attached to it, whether it is fame, fortune, or status, all of these things. If you truly understand the impermanence of life and precious human life, then you will be able to cut off these two attachments. Next, we discuss the faults of samsara and the law of karma and its effects. These two guiding texts are mainly aimed at cutting off our attachment to future lives. But this is something that many people nowadays may be lacking. We often encounter many practitioners who, in this life, think, I will meditate diligently, I will study the Dharma well. They hold this kind of idea. Why do you practice? To avoid falling into the lower realms in the next life. But even if they avoid the lower realms, are they still attached to certain pleasures? Just as is acknowledged in other religions. They have thoughts of going to heaven or to some blissful holy land. So many of us practitioners, I have come into contact with both monastics and lay people, often feel a sense of regret in their hearts. Many people have never even considered the next life at all. They feel that their practice in this life is very good, their meditation is good, and they feel happy. Or their goal is simply to be healthy and free from illness, and so on. So the most crucial thing is that nowadays, many people truly need to prioritize liberation in the next life. This issue should be placed first. During your practice, I hope everyone here will also ask themselves honestly, are you practicing the preliminaries for this life or for the next life? If it's for the next life, is your only aim to attain some kind of happiness for yourself? Or is it to achieve liberation from the cycle of samsara in the three realms forever? Is your goal in practice to transcend the cycle of samsara in the three realms? So this is extremely important. Therefore, in the process of explaining things to everyone this time, you must sincerely pray that in the future, you will not become attached in any way to the next life. You should have absolutely no interest or desire in the human realm, the animal realm, or even the heavenly realm. I must achieve complete liberation from the entire three realms, which are like a pit of fire. Just as the Karma Distinction Sutra uses analogies for samsara, such as poison, fierce and dangerous beasts, wild people, and many other truly terrifying situations to demonstrate the horrors of samsara. Therefore, spiritual practice is very important for each of us. Anyone can talk about the 6 realms of samsara. Everyone can say it with their mouths. But in reality, what is your own goal? You should examine yourself. Now let's talk about the following. If after death everything simply ends, just like a lamp going out or water quietly drying up, then of course there would be nothing more to say. But after death, things cannot just end. You are bound to be reborn. If there is rebirth, then you cannot escape the cycle of birth and death. And the reason why the following 2 guiding texts are discussed is precisely because of this. Earlier, we said that a precious human life is rare, so we must practice. And this practice should be carried out as soon as possible, within the shortest time. But why should we practice in this way? It's because after we die, it is not the case that things are as atheists and some materialists claim. That after a person dies, it's like water drying up or fire going out. And nothing remains. There is absolutely nothing. If that were truly the case, then spending considerable effort to prepare for the next life would be considered a rather foolish act. However, in reality, that is simply not the case. Therefore, we need to understand the faults of samsara. I think first we must understand the existence of past and future lives. If we don't understand the existence of past and future lives, I'm afraid many people will still remain doubtful and uncertain. As for this point, for Tibetan practitioners, it probably isn't much of an issue, because from a young age, we've received this kind of education, that past and future lives definitely exist. Among the many Tibetans we've encountered, basically, there is no doubt about this matter. On one hand, it might be, as some lamas have said, that it has always been a Mahayana foundation. On the other hand, it is related to early education and family upbringing. But for some other ethnic groups and countries, this is not the case. Indeed, from childhood, they have not received such education. Later, when they are in their 20s or 30s, due to various causes and conditions, they encounter Buddhism. Then they start to gradually enter the Buddhist path and sincerely practice virtuous deeds. During this process, whenever the topic of past and future lives comes up, some people still hold a hesitant and doubtful attitude. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Are these 6 realms, heavenly realms, hell realms, really there or not? Such questions often arise. So this issue should be addressed. First, for those who don't quite believe, you should start from the theoretical perspective. You can't just say, Buddha Shakyamuni said so, and therefore you should accept it. You must accept it. There's no such reasoning. You should conduct a detailed investigation yourself. If you examine it thoroughly, I believe that Buddhist theory surpasses any other religion or philosophy. Actually, when it comes to issues related to past and future lives, among various schools and traditions throughout the world, there is also recognition and acceptance of the soul, which does exist in some forms. For example, in early Indian Brahmanism, the Vedic texts hint at and suggest various ways in which the soul exists through relatively implicit methods. Later works such as the Upanishads within Brahmanism, as well as the Bhagavad Gita and other similar texts, also address this topic. These texts, in a clear and direct manner, clearly express the idea that the soul continues to exist after death. There are also explicit explanations of this. In Western countries, such as in ancient Greece, for example, in the philosophical works of Plato, and in the writings of some other notable philosophers from that period, this idea is also mentioned and discussed in detail, highlighting its significance and the attention it received in those societies. That people, depending on the good or bad deeds they perform in this life, will be reborn as humans or other beings in the future. There are such explanations. So in some of their writings, there are also brief explanations about the afterlife, which suggests that although the primary focus of many ancient texts was on life and moral conduct, there are still moments where the authors address or mention what might happen after death. For example, in the Han regions, which were significant cultural and political centers in ancient China, Confucianism and Taoism emerged as the main schools of thought. Within Confucian thought, particularly in some of Confucius's earlier discourses, there is the well-known saying, "If you do not understand life, how can you understand death?" This statement reflects the idea that one should first seek to understand the complexities and responsibilities of living before attempting to comprehend the mysteries of what comes after death. If one does not understand or know how birth occurs, then how can one possibly comprehend or understand death? Sometimes this is a deliberate attempt to avoid the topic. Regarding death and spirits, it is said, respect the spirits and deities, but keep your distance. There is still respect for spirits and deities, but people try not to mention them as much as possible. Some forms of materialism today are similar in this regard. Whenever the topics of past and future lives are brought up, I often, when interacting with some leaders and officials, deliberately ask them, what was your past life like? What will your future life be like? But they always try to change the subject, and then I bring it up again. In the end, they get a little bit embarrassed, and I also feel a bit awkward too. When I see their expressions, I honestly can't help but feel just a bit helpless myself, almost as if I am sharing in their discomfort. Sometimes it gets to this kind of situation. So some books also say this as well. I remember it seems like there was a Confucian book that also discussed this topic, and we can see this from looking at the story of Wang Yangming, who is quite famous and well known in Confucianism. It should be that Confucianism also acknowledges that the continuity of life exists. Wang Yangming was a famous Neo-Confucian philosopher and scholar. So what kind of process and journey did he go through later on? When he was 50 years old, he went to Jinshan Temple in Jiangsu province to pay his respects and worship. When he arrived at the monastery, he felt extremely and particularly familiar with the entire place. Then he encountered a monk there, and after they started chatting and talking together, he proceeded to go throughout the temple complex to pay his respects and worship one by one at the many Buddha statues and various Buddha halls within the monastery. There was one meditation room that was always kept closed, and he really wanted to go inside. But the monk said, "This room belonged to an abbot who passed away 50 years ago. The old monk's body has been kept inside, perfectly preserved all this time. No one is allowed to enter." But Mr. Wang had a strong feeling that he had lived there before. He just couldn't feel at ease and insisted on going in. In the end, he kept pleading. He said, "Even if I could just take a quick look, that would be enough." Eventually, the monk had no choice. They had no choice but to open this retreat room, the abbot's chamber, that had been sealed for many years. After he went inside, indeed the abbot's physical body was still there, and his entire appearance and facial complexion were very dignified and solemn. At that moment he felt as if he had been the abbot in a previous life. Then he noticed a verse written on the wall.
50 years later, Wang Yangming opens the door, yet he is still the one behind the closed door. The one who opens the door is also the one who kept it closed. After the spirit departs, it returns again. Only then do I believe that in the Zen gate the body is never destroyed. The meaning is that 50 years later, when Wang Yangming comes here, in fact the one who opens the door is him, and the one who kept it closed is also him. The so-called spirit or soul had temporarily left, but by that time it had already returned. Before that, depending on the power of dedicated Zen practice, the original physical body would not decay. So in the end, it gradually became clear that the old monk from 50 years ago was in fact actually Mr. Wang as he is now. In his previous life, he was a highly respected and great Zen abbot. This time he became a layperson living outside the monastery. Indeed, this is how it is in the cycle of reincarnation. Sometimes one may be a monk in this life and a layperson in the next. One may be a layperson in this life and a monk in the next. We have gone through such cycles countless times in the cycle of reincarnation, boundless and infinite. This is a well-recognized and widely acknowledged case in Confucianism. If such a cycle of life truly exists and can be observed over a period of more than 50 years, then establishing the existence of both past and future lives is not very difficult or challenging. Generally speaking, it is important to note in Taoism, for example, there are many secret methods for longevity and immortality. But as for the treatises that truly establish the existence of past and future lives, I haven't actually seen them myself, but there should be some. But there is a story you might know, the story of Li Xuan. He was also a very famous lineage master in Taoism, meaning he was a highly respected teacher who passed down important spiritual knowledge and practices to his disciples. Later, through his own cultivation, which in Taoism refers to a process of self-improvement involving meditation, self-discipline, and moral refinement, he achieved a significant level of spiritual development. After reaching this state, he told his disciple, Yang Zi, "I will leave my physical body in the human world," meaning that while his physical form would remain, his spirit would transcend to a higher state of existence, and let my soul gently leave my physical body, directly to go before the Supreme Lord Laozi. At first, his disciple begged him not to go, but in the end there was nothing he could do. He instructed his disciple, "You must keep watch over me for 7 days straight. If I haven't returned after 7 days, you can take care of my body." These were the words the master spoke to his disciple before leaving. The disciple, who always respected and followed his master's teachings, took these instructions seriously. He stayed by his master's body, never leaving his side, and waited patiently through each day and night, determined to fulfill his master's final request. On the 6th day, as the disciple continued his faithful watch, Yang Zi's uncle arrived to call him. He said that Yang Zi's mother had fallen ill, and he had to leave. At that time, Yang Zi said, "No, my master told me there's still 1 day left. I've kept watch for 6 days. He has already left his physical body." Later, his uncle kept scolding him. He said, "The person has been dead for 6 days, and you're still guarding his body. Isn't this an act of ignorance?" He demanded that the body be cremated immediately. So together, after some discussion, and with a sense of solemn responsibility, they decided to cremate Li Xuan's body, following the customs and rituals of their time. The process was carried out with respect and sadness, as those close to Li Xuan gathered to honor his memory and say their final goodbyes. On the 7th day after the cremation, something remarkable happened. Li Xuan returned, having come back from the Supreme Lord Laozi's place. At that time, Laozi gave him a verse which carried a significant meaning. The verse meant that when Li Xuan returned, his body would have already been taken care of by those he left behind. That was the meaning behind Laozi's words. Then, when he arrived at the cave, there really was no body. He searched everywhere, thoroughly exploring every possible location he could imagine, determined to find what he was looking for. Despite his persistent efforts and unwavering resolve, he eventually discovered, to his disappointment, that it had turned to ashes and was completely gone, leaving nothing behind. Later, in a way similar to the body transference practices found in Tibet, where it is believed that certain advanced practitioners can transfer their consciousness into another body, he entered the corpse of a beggar and appeared in that form, taking on the beggar's appearance. In the past, Karma Pakshi, who was known as the self-arisen Vajra, was also regarded as an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion. A family's child had died, and then, using the body transference method, he entered the child's body. The child had just died a short while before, and he entered the body. After the child died, his eyes started to move. At that time, the family said this was very inauspicious. They thought it was ominous for a dead person's eyes to still be moving. They were so frightened that they stuck a needle into the eyes. In the end, he felt that without eyes, he could not obtain a precious human body with all faculties. So he truly had no other choice but to be reborn a second time as their child. He was once again reborn. Such things, as unusual as they may seem, do happen. Therefore, the reality of past and future lives and the existence of the soul are indeed real. This is not just a Buddhist perspective. In Buddhism, how past and future lives exist is explained very clearly. The entire process is described in great detail. Other religions, such as Catholicism and Christianity, some of them also acknowledge that after a person dies, they are reborn in the heavenly realm or in heaven. But what happens after that and how one is reborn is explained rather vaguely in many of these teachings. In Buddhism, however, it is clearly explained why one is reborn in a particular place, what the reasons for rebirth are, and whether one ultimately falls into lower realms or attains liberation. These theories are quite comprehensive. So when we encounter questions about past and future lives, on the one hand, as Buddhists, we must understand them clearly. If you don't understand the reasoning behind it, especially for some intellectuals, there may always be a lingering doubt in their hearts, whether it really exists or not, and as a result, various wrong views arise from our discriminating mind. If we truly have sound reasoning and evidence, then we might have no choice but to accept it. There was once an elderly gentleman in England who could, quite remarkably, remember his past life from over 2,000 years ago. I have actually read about this in some materials before. He was a person from an ancient city more than 2,000 years ago. He specifically assisted some archaeologists using his recollections of his past life and was able to carefully verify many truly remarkable and noteworthy things. There are now countless cases like this. Many people who don't believe in any religion at all are able to recall their past lives. Therefore, the first thing we must understand is that people are not as society currently recognizes them to be, suddenly coming into existence, and then nothing remains after death. It absolutely does not work that way. It's just that many people have never listened to or contemplated Buddhist teachings and do not understand the profound principles within Buddhism. When I was teaching the treatise on past and present lives, many intellectuals in the Institute felt that this was very rewarding for them. Why is that? Because on the surface, especially for monastics, on the surface perhaps no one would say that past and future lives do not exist. You wear the robes of Buddha Shakyamuni and have a shaved head. So if you don't acknowledge past and future lives, you would feel embarrassed in front of others. But in reality, a very small number of people do still harbor such doubts in their hearts. If you practice with a skeptical attitude like this, there's no need to even talk about future liberation. So this is a very crucial issue. If any of you have doubts or questions, you should ask, discuss, and openly explore them in front of wise people and develop genuine conviction. This is very important. So here, we will also give everyone a brief introduction. Nowadays, many people are confused about past and future lives. The reason is simply that they don't understand Buddhism. If they understood Buddhism, then the theories in this area are actually quite extensive. So we know that one of the reasons why samsara continuously revolves is that human life does not suddenly cease to exist. Generally speaking, what we call samsara, or the cycle of rebirth, is like the potter's wheel in a craftsman's hand, the water wheel in a well, or a bee in a bottle. They all spin continuously. Here, in this particular context, many different metaphors are thoughtfully used. The potter's wheel, which is carefully spun in the skilled craftsman's hand, and the water wheel that turns steadily in the well are both examples. In the Buddhist scripture called the Contemplation of Buddha Samadhi Sutra, the metaphor of a wheel of fire is specifically used to illustrate this idea. And in the Sutra on Impermanence, the metaphor of a water wheel is again employed to convey the same concept of continuous movement and change. Previously, in the Middle Way treatise, the water wheel metaphor was also used, just like a water wheel that turns endlessly without any real sense of freedom or self-determination. So, this water wheel metaphor is used quite often, especially in discussions about the nature of existence. There are also the Dhammapada Sutra of Parables, the Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra, and the Sutra on Contemplating the Mind Ground. In these important scriptures, the concept of samsara is carefully explained using the metaphor of a wheel. Which scripture says this? Sentient beings drifting in the ocean of afflictions are like bees inside bamboo holes. Sentient beings revolve within the vast ocean of afflictions. The process of drifting is like a bee trapped inside a bamboo tube. Actually, this metaphor is quite similar to the one here. For example, if you put a small bee inside a glass bottle and then carefully seal the mouth of the bottle, then the bee can only fly around inside the bottle. In the same way, whether one is born into a fortunate realm, experiencing happiness and prosperity, or falls into an unfortunate one, facing suffering and hardship, one cannot escape the bounds of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. A bee trapped inside a glass bottle cannot get out. Similarly, once we are reborn within samsara, this cycle of existence, we cannot go beyond it or transcend its limitations. The fortunate realms of humans and gods are like the space at the top of the bottle, while the unfortunate realms are like the space at the bottom of the bottle. In this way, sentient beings of the 6 realms relying on contaminated virtuous and non-virtuous karma as causes, continuously taking rebirth and wandering without end, this is called samsara. This is due to virtuous and non-virtuous karma, as explained in the Abhidharmakosha. With contaminated virtuous and non-virtuous karma, one cannot transcend samsara. Sometimes I think nowadays many people don't even have the intention to escape samsara in their hearts. They just recite sutras and practice meditation every day. This is contaminated virtuous karma. They have neither realized emptiness, nor are their actions supported by bodhicitta. If one only practices virtuous deeds, one merely experiences alternating states of happiness and suffering within samsara. Due to various desires, attachments, and conditions, one may fall into the 3 lower realms of existence. Within the 6 realms of samsara, one must endure all kinds of suffering, pain, and torment. This is explained in the Lotus Sutra. Because in this world, through various causes and conditions of desire, sometimes we fall into the 3 lower realms, and at other times we gain liberation from the 3 lower realms, and are reborn into the 3 higher realms. In this way, the cycle repeats endlessly, continuously revolving within samsara. We experience countless and immeasurable sufferings. This is the very nature of samsara. So what is samsara? As explained in The Precious Garland of the Middle Way, it is likened to a wheel of fire without beginning, middle, or end, using such an analogy to illustrate this point. We can also understand this through the process described in the teaching of the 12 links of dependent origination. So, why are we explaining this here? It is because every practitioner must have the determination to transcend samsara. Previously, I used an analogy. It is like someone locked in a prison. Even if, for the time being, they eat well and dress well, it is still a prison after all. One day I hope to be released from it. So even if we have food and clothing now, and no matter how happy our lives may seem, after all, it is inseparable from suffering. Therefore, we must develop a longing for liberation. Without the aspiration for liberation, one cannot be called a true practitioner. Since beginningless time, we have been wandering in samsara. Among all sentient beings, there is no one who has not been our parent, friend, enemy, or just an ordinary person. This interconnection among all sentient beings is very important. Right now, within samsara, all sentient beings are interconnected. Every other sentient being has been my parent before, and I have also been the parent of other sentient beings. Therefore, it is stated in the Mahasamnipata Sutra, there is not a single sentient being who has not been my parent. Everyone should remember this. There is not a single sentient being who has not been my parent. There is not a single individual being who has not, without exception, been my parent. There are none who have not. All have been. The Brahmajala Sutra says, all men are my fathers, all women are my mothers. So in the scriptural teachings, the Buddha spoke about this extensively. According to the teachings of some masters from the Kadampa, Gelug, and Nyingma traditions, whether we are contemplating the suffering of samsara or cultivating bodhicitta, we must truly understand that all sentient beings have indeed been our parents. It's not just as if this is merely a story from Buddhist tales. There are such things in legends, in mythological stories. But it's not like that. You must have deep faith in this. Why did the Buddha, in texts like the Bodhisattva's Conduct Sutra, or the Jataka Tales, and the Sutra of the Collection of the 6 Perfections, repeatedly emphasize in these related scriptures that in my previous lives I became a Brahmin, that in my previous lives I became a merchant, and explain to his followers the reasons for his past life experiences? This was to illustrate the Buddha never spoke any falsehoods. He was one who spoke truthfully, who spoke words of truth. So what the Buddha proclaimed, that he had already been an ordinary person, all kinds of people, in the cycle of samsara, we, his disciples, deeply believe without any doubt, truly. It's just that we ourselves do not know what we were in our past lives. But in reality, samsara, past and future lives, definitely exist. We must understand this principle. Suppose we were to take all the earth on the ground and roll it into pellets the size of jujube pits, and count them one by one, saying, this being's mother is this one, that being's mother is that one, until the number of earth pellets is exhausted. Yet the number of times each sentient being has been each other's mother still would not be exhausted. All of the above is what is stated in the Buddhist scriptures. This analogy is explained very clearly in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. When we have time, let's try to read some Mahayana Buddhist scriptures, including the metaphors and the content. They are things we should understand. It means, for example, if we were to turn the entire earth into countless tiny pellets. Then we say, for each sentient being, what kind of mother they have been in the past. Each sentient being has been a mother, one by one. And every time we count one, you take out a pellet. In this way, all the earth in the world made into pellets would eventually be used up. But because sentient beings are countless, the number of times they've been our parents is truly infinite and boundless. There's no way to ever reach the end. That's why Nagarjuna Bodhisattva also says this in the letter to a friend. If the earth were rolled into pellets the size of jujube pits, their number would still not match the number of times beings have been our mothers. From beginningless time until now, every sentient being has been reborn in this way. There is no one who hasn't. During this time, the number of heads and limbs severed out of greed and self-interest is countless, because for the sake of our own benefit, in this process, we have indeed lost and surrendered our bodies countless, immeasurable, and boundless times. If we were to pile up all the bodies we've had as ants and other small creatures in one place, the heap would definitely be higher than Mount Sumeru. If in our past lives as ants, mosquitoes, and other tiny beings, every time we died, we gathered up those bodies together. Then, from countless eons up to now, if we collected all those bodies, not to mention the bodies of larger animals or humans, if we just gathered together all the bodies of these small sentient beings, it would definitely surpass Mount Sumeru. The Buddha also said in the Samyukta Agama Sutra that if, over the course of one kalpa, a person gathered all their bones, and if they were always being accumulated continuously without ever decaying or diminishing, they would eventually become like Mount Vipula. This means that within the span of a single kalpa for just one person, if you just take the bones from one kalpa, not even countless kalpas, the bones of that being as they are reborn as sentient beings, if all of them were piled together, they would be higher than the King of Mountains, countless and boundless. This is also stated in the Common Vehicles Agama Sutras. Because with no food in their mouths and no clothes on their backs, they experienced the suffering of hunger and cold, with parched lips and dry tongues, among other pains. And if all the tears shed from crying, before they dried up, were collected together, they would certainly far exceed the water of all the great oceans. If in the past we had nothing to eat or wear and suffered greatly, all the tears we cried every day, if gathered together, would be more than the vast oceans. Nowadays, people in the world, especially women, sometimes tend to cry a lot. They even feel that they themselves have shed too many tears. If all these tears were collected together, maybe not as much as a river, but perhaps a bit more than a basin of water. But just the molten copper and iron water drunk while being born in hell alone is still more than the water in several of the great oceans combined. The suffering we experienced in hell was truly immense. So for every sentient being, there is really nothing to be arrogant about. Whether you are a learned person or someone with wealth, if you truly knew your own past lives, it would actually be terrifying. That's why nowadays, when people have a bit of knowledge or status, some leaders, for the time being, use various means to, with just a bit of status, they act extremely arrogant in front of everyone. Especially nowadays, some ignorant people are particularly arrogant. But if we look at it from the perspective of the countless lifetimes we've spent in samsara since beginningless time, and from the viewpoint of having been all kinds of sentient beings, in fact, there really is nothing for us to be arrogant about. This includes some of the top leaders of countries in the world. In this life, they may be great leaders of a nation, standing before tens of thousands of people. But in the next life, because of the terrible karma created in this very life, It's very possible they could become a small creature trampled by countless sentient beings. Such experiences can happen, therefore it's very important for everyone to contemplate these profound truths about samsara. On the surface, these teachings may seem simple, but when you reflect on them, they are indeed indispensable for a practitioner. If you truly understand these principles, you might become especially fearful whenever you recall the various sufferings of samsara. The great master Aryadeva also once said, "If ordinary beings truly knew all the sufferings of cyclic existence, then in that very instant both body and mind would be destroyed." If we ordinary people really understood our past and future lives, the entire long process of birth and death, if you truly knew it, at that moment, you might be so incredibly terrified that your body and mind would be completely overwhelmed. But right now, let alone since beginningless time, even in this very life, after our own death, the simple idea that happiness in the next life comes from virtuous actions and suffering comes from non-virtuous actions, even such a basic concept. There are still so many people who don't believe in Buddhism, which is understandable, but even among those who do, some are still not focused. And if they still lack this right knowledge and right view, it's truly a pity. That's why our study and practice are indeed very important. Even though this is simply the way things are, still there are those who never give rise to even a momentary sense of renunciation towards samsara, and people who remain stubbornly attached and deluded, bound by their own ignorance, will inevitably continue to suffer even more intensely in the boundless cycle of samsara. Just as I mentioned earlier, although sentient beings have been our parents since beginningless time, and samsara is truly terrifying in this way, still many sentient beings have yet to awaken and continue to remain lost in delusion. They remain endlessly attached to all sorts of trivial matters within samsara, and it is clear that such people will inevitably experience immeasurable suffering in the future, even if, by relying on the small amount of merit they have accumulated, they are reborn as Brahma or Indra, enjoying bodies that are long-lived, prosperous, powerful, and dignified in appearance. In the end, they still cannot escape the fate of death, and after death they will inevitably taste the miserable suffering of the lower realms. So those who temporarily possess wealth, honor, and good health, and enjoy these insignificant pleasures, within just a few years, a few months, or even just a few days, will become destitute and pitiable once the positive karma that brought them happiness is exhausted, or, whether they wish it or not, will have to endure the unbearable suffering of the lower realms. This is truly the very nature of samsara. Even the gods in the heavenly realms experience immense happiness and joy, but in the end, when their positive karma is finally exhausted in a very short time, just as it is described in the letter to a friend, they will fall from those realms. The same is true in the human world as well, including some wealthy people, those who are especially rich. People with power and status, when death comes to them, all their wealth and possessions become useless. All of these things, everything, are of no help whatsoever and must all be abandoned. So when everyone deeply contemplates the entire tragic situation of samsara, you realize that the objects people are so attached to are just like this, nothing more. At that moment you will suddenly awaken to the truth. Therefore temporary happiness and joy are just like prospering in a dream and then suddenly waking up. What real value do they have? None at all. Sentient beings are truly terrified, trapped in the cycle of samsara. As it is also stated in Resting in the Nature of Mind, the Great Perfection, wealth in a dream vanishes upon waking. Just like in a dream, one may be incredibly wealthy and prosperous. But when they wake up, everything is gone. In the same way, throughout a person's entire life, no matter if they become a billionaire or one of the most famous people in the world, once your flesh and bones, your five aggregates, disperse, once you leave this world, will you still have any of this worldly fame or status? No, you won't. So, just as it is stated in the final words of the Precious Treasury of Pith instructions, I myself, when my body and mind are more relaxed, often reflect on this repeatedly. All these things we are so attached to every day, when the day of your actual death arrives, what will truly remain are the virtuous deeds you have practiced in the past. These will definitely follow you. Virtuous actions are truly beneficial to you, and the negative karma you create will inevitably follow you as well. Apart from these, absolutely nothing else will be of any use. So beings who are truly trapped within samsara are sometimes, at times, in a truly terrifying situation. If there is no reflection, many people around us are completely lost and confused. Every day they are absorbed in their own affairs as if everything is just fine. It's like yaks that are about to be slaughtered. When they're still in the pen, they might still experience some temporary happiness. Looking at the expressions of some of the yaks, they even seem quite happy. But in reality, if we truly understood, it would be terrifying. In the same way, many people here in this cycle of samsara sometimes feel very happy, but what is the actual situation? Sentient beings are lost in the ocean of birth and death, endlessly cycling through the 5 realms of samsara with no way out. In the scriptures, which one exactly I can't recall, it is said that sentient beings are already submerged in the vast ocean of birth and death. Indeed, the beings of the 5 destinies and 6 realms have no time for liberation. If we continue in the same habitual way as before, following our discriminating thoughts and letting things go on like this, there will never be a time for liberation. Therefore, this time, it's as if a blind person has managed to grab the tail of an elephant. Now that we have already obtained the wondrous Dharma of liberation, we must seize this opportunity in this very lifetime. Everyone should make a vow. From this moment on, I will no longer allow myself to be immersed in samsara. Otherwise, it would be truly terrifying. We should have this kind of resolve. Relying on a little bit of virtuous karma in the present, those who seem to be happy and content on the surface, once their karmic merit is exhausted, have no right to hold on for even a moment. Even those sitting on Chetsun Nyingtik thrones adorned with heavenly garments, the heavenly kings who indulge in the 5 kinds of sensual pleasures and experience unparalleled happiness, not to mention us humans, even these heavenly kings who have enjoyed every possible happiness, when their lifespan ends in the blink of an eye, they will plunge headfirst into hell and experience suffering on the burning iron ground. This is the fate of celestial beings, as stated in the Sutra of Mindfulness of the true Dharma. When celestial beings fall into hell, the pain they experience at that moment surpasses even 1/16 of the suffering in hell itself. It is simply indescribable. So at that time, the suffering is immense. This too is the nature of samsara. And then there are the sun and the moon. According to what is explained in the Abhidharmakosha, they are also celestial beings. Even though they possess the radiance that illuminates the 4 continents, in the end, when they are reborn into a place so dark that you can't see your hand in front of your face, completely pitch black. So even though they now illuminate all 4 great continents with such power, in the end, at the moment of death, they can't even see their own outstretched limbs, and will eventually end up in such a completely pitch black, utterly dark place. That's why, in some oceans or deep within certain mountains, there are some beings living in extreme darkness, who in their past lives had a certain radiance and prestige. But, for example, some scriptures also mention this. In this life, those who slander the Dharma or destroy Buddhist scriptures or create obstacles when the Dharma is being taught, these people will be reborn in especially dark and terrifying places in the future. The so-called happiness in samsara is completely unreliable and not to be trusted at all. Everyone should understand this point. In this guidance session, everyone should also be aware that there is no true happiness to be found anywhere in the 6 realms of samsara. Moreover, the 6 realms of samsara truly exist. Ultimately, nothing exists, but conventionally, samsara does exist. For example, even though we cannot see Canada or Washington, USA right now, they do in fact exist. Why is that? Because many people have been there, and there are many reasons to prove their existence. In the same way, the worlds of hungry ghosts and hell beings, as well as the heavens, the form realm, and the formless realm, we cannot see them with our physical eyes right now, but there is also plenty of evidence for their existence. All of these belong to samsara, and within samsara, there is no true happiness. Therefore, in our future lives, we must seek liberation from the entirety of samsara. We must attain the state of a bodhisattva and ultimately the state of a Buddha. This is our ultimate goal. I worry that many people, whether during the day or at night, they practice every day in a daze without clarity. But if you ask yourself honestly, truly reflect within, oh, I've been at the Institute for so many years. Have I ever truly thought about liberation? Some lay practitioners have been studying Buddhism for more than 10 or even 20 years. But you should ask yourself, is your Buddhist practice really is it like the smell of durian? I really dislike and cannot stand smelling them the most. You see, samsara is just this painful, and this suffering is something that touches each and every one of us in our lives. Therefore, each of us really needs to reflect on this reality and consider carefully what it means for ourselves. This is a very important question, one that deserves our sincere attention and thoughtful consideration. We must make a firm resolution within ourselves to face this suffering honestly and to seek a way to overcome it so that we can move toward true peace and lasting happiness. In this very life, we must give our all to break free from the great sea of suffering that is samsara and attain everlasting happiness and the perfect, complete enlightenment. The above principles should be practiced completely with preliminary, main, and concluding practices. It's not enough to just talk about it. When you do the preliminary practices, you should contemplate these points over and over again, just like the methods described in the preliminary practices memorandum. The preliminary practices must also be complete. Then during the main practice, you really need to contemplate each guiding text in actual meditation. And you must think about escaping from samsara. In short, first understand that past and future lives exist and that the 6 realms of samsara exist. This is the first question. The second important point is to attain liberation from it. What I am talking about today is to contemplate these 2 questions. If you have any doubts about these 2 questions, investigate them while listening and contemplating. If you have no doubts and are sure samsara exists, rebirth in samsara brings no real happiness. You must attain liberation. So if you practice with this kind of mindset, its power will be very great. Very quickly you will not cling to future lives nor to this present life. Such power in practice is definitely very strong. If you don't have this kind of strength, and you think, I want happiness in this life, and in my next life I want to be reborn in such and such a way, I want wealth, talent, and benefit, then practicing with this mindset will not lead to successful practice. Therefore, in the process of practice, you must always rely on the 3 excellences, preliminary practices, main, and concluding practices, to support your cultivation. That's a brief explanation for now. Sonam Dei Tamse Prabhaya Tanani Dharma Pasi Jirgana Jirano Chupai Chupun Solen Dravasya
Bandharangara Badna Sodargye Bandharangara Badna Sodargye Bandharangara Badna Sodargye